I'm going to be altering this oversized button-down shirt that I made because I really like the fabric and would love for it to fit me. I will be using this Bernina 910 sewing machine during the lesson, but any basic sewing machine will do for what you'll be learning. Any of these alterations can be sewn by hand with a needle and thread if need be. My machine is set up with a standard presser foot and a regular point needle, which is suitable for the fabric that I'm working with. I'm using an all-purpose thread and my bobbin is loaded with the same. I've got pins, sharp scissors, a fabric pen, which is disappearing ink with water or heat, and a seam ripper. Not essential but handy is a ruler. You'll need an iron and either an ironing board or a towel on a flat surface. Totally optional tools to finish raw edges would be a serger or pinking shears. If you don't have either, you can use your sewing machine to sew a zigzag or just leave the edges raw. I like to put on my oversized button down and take a look in the mirror to see where it's ill-fitting. This one is basically huge in the middle, so I'm going to take in the front with 2 darts and take in the sides. Darts are basically folds or tucks that are sewn into the fabric to create shape. This pocket is right in the way, so we're going to take it off. I like to get settled in my chair with a seam ripper and carefully break the threads around the pocket to remove it without damaging the fabric underneath. You don't want to rush this part. If you rip every other stitch, you should be able to easily pull the back thread in 1 or 2 pieces. It will be sewn more densely at the top. Okay, now we're ready to fit ourselves for the front darts. To fit yourself for front darts, you can put on your shirt inside out and find the fullest part of your chest. You'll want to place a pin about 1 inch below that, catching just a tiny bit of fabric. The next part of the dart is marked at the smallest part of your torso, typically just below your rib cage and just above your belly button. You can pinch this as close to your body as you want the seam to be, but keep in mind comfort of movement. I'm going to keep this shirt a bit loose, and I'm placing a pin parallel to my body so I can try it on later. I'm following the natural grain of the fabric. You can give it a tug to find that nice straight line. I'll pin where I want the hips of the shirt to hit. Now I'm just repeating on the other side, matching the pin locations. I'm going to lay my shirt down on a flat surface and reposition any pins as needed, keeping the dart nice and straight along the fabric grain. I'm going to repeat on the other side and make sure the darts are the same distance from the center. You'll want to mark the pin locations on both sides of the fabric with a fabric marker or chalk. We're going to need to remove the stitches at the hem of the shirt, otherwise it'll give you a headache later and an uneven hem. I'm going to rip out the hem about 1 inch or more on either side of my markings. To prep your shirt for sewing darts, I'm moving my pins to be horizontal. You'll be able to sew right over these while keeping the fabric in place. Take out the top pin and if you want, use a ruler to mark your sewing line. I'm going to load up my machine with thread and make sure that my bobbin is loaded with the same. I'm going to set my stitch to be a straight stitch. My machine has 2 spots to set this, and I'm going to adjust my stitch length to a nice medium setting. Now we're ready to sew the dart, starting at the bottom edge of the fabric. Start off slowly, follow your markings, and keep the fabric nice and taut. When you get to the point of the dart, you want to make the last few stitches as close as possible to the fold of the fabric and sew right off the edge. I'm tying off the top of the stitch using a square knot so it stays put. And trimming. You'll want to iron the dart with the extra fabric away from the center of the shirt.
At the beginning of my sewing journey just 6 years ago, I didn't even know how to make a napkin, but now I make almost all of my clothes from scratch. Hi, my name is Robyn Burgess. I'm a sewist and founder of Styles and Seams, a fit-obsessed sewing blog and indie pattern business. I started sewing 6 years ago after decades of struggling to find clothes that fit my 6'2" body, my budget, and my bold, cheerful style. Now, I am proud to say that I have not bought clothes since 2018. Everything I wear, I create from my imagination and my sewing machine. If I can learn this craft, so can you. So let's dive in. Let's take one side of our pattern and put the other side of the pattern away. Because we've made this pattern about 3/8 of an inch bigger than our zipper, we're gonna sew up to the zipper on the seam allowance, but not through this metal. In order to sew the zipper, you're gonna need a zipper foot. The key to a zipper foot is that it has these indentations so that the needle can go really, really close. As you're running the zipper foot down the machine, it's gonna go along the side here and the needle can go up pretty close to that zipper. A regular presser foot sticks out all the way through that width, and so it's not possible to get so close to the zipper teeth. Let's switch out the presser foot. The other thing is that once I put the zipper foot onto my machine, I need to move the needle position. My default needle position of my machine is over to the left, but I need it to be in the center in order to really take advantage of the zipper foot. So I'm just gonna switch that to the stitch where the needle positioning is in the center. I can see here on the pattern of my machine, the location of that needle positioning by the dot that's just right in here. So I know if I press this button and go up to 1, it's gonna move it over to be centered. I also do like to double check. And so before I put all of the pressure of the machine going fast, I like to turn my hand wheel and just watch where it goes and make sure that it's not gonna hit the presser foot when I put the needle down. Let's line it up so that the outside edge of the zipper matches with the outside edge of our pattern, with the right side of the zipper facing the right side of the pattern. And then I'm just going to adjust it so that we have 3/8 of an inch seam allowance at top and at the bottom. If you wanted to, you can measure that onto your fabric and make a little mark. Do that if you can't eyeball it. Now that I know that I've given myself enough clearance on both sides for my seam allowance, I'm going to take some pins and I'm going to pin the zipper to my pattern. We have the zipper face down against the pattern, and what we want to stitch on is this edge. So I've just put it under the presser foot and I'm into the seam allowance back here. And I have the zipper foot as far over as I can go. This stop is gonna make it a little bit difficult to actually stitch super close right there, but that's perfectly okay. I don't like breaking needles and there's a lot of metal here. So once again, I'm gonna use my hand crank to put the needle down safely and make sure it's in a good position before I start sewing with my presser foot. And again, first thing we're always gonna do is go forward 3 stitches, go back 3 stitches, and back stitch. So now that we've back stitched, we're ready to sew. So go slow and be careful around your zipper pull. All right, see, it's gonna get a little stuck, so I'm just gonna lift it up over it. You might have to maneuver a little bit, it's okay. All right, we're done. So I'm just gonna snip these and get rid of any loose threads. So I'm gonna take my other side and I am going to basically do the same thing by putting the right sides together. So you can either put it on top this way, or you can flip it over and put it on top like this. You want your pattern to match up so the curves are in the same direction. So once again, I'm going to give myself the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on either side of the zipper pull and stop, and I'm going to pin this to the fabric. So we're about to do the exact same thing, but on the other side. And now because we're on the other side, instead of starting with this zipper pull, we're going to be ending with this zipper pull. So just make sure that you have the other side of your fabric out of the way and that the seam allowance isn't showing either. And let's put this back here in the seam allowance. We haven't moved our needle at this point. We haven't moved our stitch settings at this point. So we'll put the needle down. We're going to back stitch at the front, stitch, and then back stitch at the end. If you get a little stuck, it's just because the presser foot is getting stuck against the stop here. So just lift up a little bit and put it back down and try to get that on top of it. Just do a little practice and make sure it moves. All right, we're now at the tricky bit next to the zipper pull. I'm gonna try to go as far as we can and just finish it out in the seam allowance. Back stitch. Lift up our needle, lift up our presser foot, and clip. By the way, these little thread snips are super cheap and my favorite thing to have at my sewing machine because they're easy to hold in your hand while you're working, so you can go fast. Let's put our sewing machine aside, grab our iron for the next step. As we're pressing it open, you'll see it's open with the zipper in the middle. So we're gonna press it down this way. Be mindful, I'm using a metal zipper, which means that it is going to get hot. You can burn yourself if you press it super hot and then you touch it. So we're not gonna touch the metal after I do this. So that's the wrong side. And let's do it on the right side as well. Now it's pressed nice and flat. You can see our beautiful zipper. And on the wrong side, it's nice and open. Let's give the metal a second to cool before we go back to the sewing machine. So we were just introduced to the zipper foot, and now I want you to meet the edge stitch foot. The edge stitch foot is used for edge stitching, which is sewing a line of stitching close to a seam line. Generally speaking, an edge stitch is 1/8 of an inch away from a seam line, while a top stitch is 1/4 of an inch away from a seam line. Both are basically top stitching, but by definition, they're slightly different. We're gonna use the edge stitch foot so that we can sew a line of stitching close to the seam line here so that we can make sure that our seam allowance and our zipper tape stays away from the zipper as we have the clutch. The other thing that this will help do for us is finish the edge of this fabric. Because you'll remember, we didn't do anything with this denim and you can already see it's fraying even though we only cut it a few minutes ago. I'm gonna do a row of edge stitching and then we're gonna come back and do a row of top stitching, which I think you should try your hand at just to see how it works. Let's switch out our presser foot, put this one on. I don't usually turn my machine on and off, but I do try to keep my foot far away from the pedal whenever I'm changing the presser foot so that I don't accidentally put the needle down into my finger. So the purpose of the edge stitch foot is to effectively help you get that line. So it's gonna go right in this divot of the seam line between the zipper teeth and this denim that's pushed back. And right now, because I'm in the center and I have the edge stitch foot mostly closed, they're basically in the same line. But remember, I wanna stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So I'm gonna move the position of my needle by switching down to the 0, 0 stitch so that I can get it 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And let's make sure that we have enough of your fabric underneath of the needle. A common problem with sewing is trying to start sewing exactly on the very edge of the fabric, but that's not gonna work for you because the feed dogs need a little bit of something to grab onto. So the reason why we have a little bit of seam allowance is so we can start in from the edge and push it back past the needle a little bit so we have something for it to grab onto and push through the machine. Just gonna fold this up a little bit and I'm ready to start stitching. Just a word of caution, as you get close to the zipper pull, you might get it caught a little bit in the edge stitch foot, so go a little bit of slow and make sure it can find its way without problem. You might need to lift up a little bit to get it over the hump. And if it still won't go forward, just help it out a little bit. All right, we're at the end. Let's backstitch. Let's pull it off and cut it. You can see how that edge stitch foot helped us to achieve a perfectly straight line. Now, if I had to do that freehand just with like a normal, like universal foot, I wouldn't have had that level of control. But because this little edge went down in here, it kept it perfectly straight for me. So that's another really good hack for beginner sewists or for someone who's more intermediate even. Use your presser feet to help you keep those straight lines. I'm gonna take and do it with the other side now and go a lot faster. So I have my row of edge stitching. Now again, I challenge you to go and do another row of top stitching. Top stitching, again, is 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, so it's just another 1/8 of an inch away from your first row of stitching. I'm just gonna widen out my edge stitch foot a little bit so that I can get that 1/4 of an inch. Press it down just to confirm I like the width. All right, there we go. So let's just clip all the threads off. All right, our edge stitching is all done and we got some nice, slightly imperfect top stitching, but it keeps our fabric from fraying too much because we have these rows of stitches securing it. So the last thing to do with the zipper is just cut off this little excess that we have at the top and the bottom because we don't need it.
So again, just choose a thread, any color, choose one that brings you joy. So we're going to start with a back stitch. A back stitch is really great for outlines. So just start putting your needle at the beginning of the line, through the fabric, and pull. A good distance for the stitch is about half the length of your fingernail. So I guess that would be about just under 1 centimeter, and pull it through. Then come up for your next stitch. Instead of going forward to create a running stitch, we're going to go backwards into the hole of our previous stitch like that. So now we have 2 stitches seamlessly together. And then our next stitch will come out through the beginning of that one. This is really great for outlines. And you just keep going, one forward, one backwards. As you can see, this line is slightly disappearing, which is really, really great with the air erasable pens. It's nice if you want to test out details that you're not sure if you want to commit to them, because things like the pen and the carbon paper, which I'll show later, is permanent and hard to get out. So you have to stitch over them, whereas this is a non-committal pen. So once you finish your back stitch, just turn around. And then the way that we finish is you take your needle and you just go underneath one of your previous stitches to create a loop. And then take your needle through the loop and create a knot. What you can also do is just go under one more. And then we're going to cut just underneath there so that there's a nice neat finish and there aren't too many tails sticking out the back of your fabric. You can also trim them down if you feel like they're going to be an issue later. So here we have a basic back stitch. The next example of creating a straight line is couching. Couching is simply just creating one stitch and using smaller stitches to hold it down. So I'm just going to create a line like this, and I'm going to show how we can also use this to create nice curvatures like that. So again, just choose a thread, any color. Choose one that brings you joy. Thread your needle. Create your knot. So you're going to go in at your first point, down at your next point, and then just along the line of that stitch, you come out next to it, and you just use one little stitch to hold it down. So there we have one straight line that has just been held down by two little stitches. You can also do this along an arch. Don't pull the thread too tight, because obviously you're going to need enough thread to go along the arch so that it's not straight. And create a stitch like this. So this is where you just got to be careful not to pull too tight. And then just hold it down. Do this a little bit further along the line. And hold it down. One more, just further down the line. And hold it down. Obviously, the more little grabs, essentially, that you create, the more defined and the more kind of accurate the line will be. And to knot it, just go underneath one of your previous stitches to create your loop. Put your needle through the loop. And snip. So from here, I'm going to show you two different types of full stitches. I'm just going to make a little square that we're going to color in with the air erasable pen. And again, choose the color that makes you happy. So the first full and the most simple full that we're going to use is a satin stitch. So start off at any corner of your block and work your way down. Then come up next to your first stitch and then come down. Keep going like this until you've filled your block or whichever area it is that you're working in. The satin stitch creates a really beautiful flat fill, and depending on your thread can pick up like a really amazing shine. So if you have a matte thread, it will have a very different look to if you have a thread with shine. It's okay if you go a little bit skew, like I have. You can just add extra stitches. So as you can see, it's a nice, flat, solid fill. Another version of a satin stitch that I'm going to show you is going to be with a variegated thread. Variegated threads change color along the distance of the thread. So here we can see this one goes from a light purple to almost like a fuchsia to a blue back to fuchsia. So whereas the previous satin stitch goes next to each other every time and the back looks the same as the front, this one we're going to go up, down, up, down, up, down. The reason we do this is so that we get the gentle gradients that happen with the thread all on the surface of the fabric as opposed to behind the fabric. So we don't lose the transitions and the magic of the variegation. So again, you start at any corner and then you go up to the top. But instead of coming down again at your beginning point, you come out at your previous, just next to your previous hole. And again. It is really important when you are using variegated threads to be mindful of those transitions. They're really nice when you're doing textured fills in a way to get an effect of lots of colors coming through, but without having to constantly re-thread and change your needle. So here you can see the color is transitioning really seamlessly and it looks really beautiful. So you can see the difference between the two satin stitches when you turn it around. The first one the front and the back look the same because essentially you're wrapping it around the fabric. Whereas the second one, because we're zigzagging like this, you don't have the same amount of stitches going around. This is actually a more economical way to create a satin stitch. Again, when you tie it off, just go underneath any little stitch that you can, just like that, even if it's small. Create your loop and go through. So the second fill I'm going to show you is a long and short stitch. So the short and long stitch is exactly what it sounds like, a short and a long stitch. So we'll start again at the corner, create a stitch, and the second stitch, which we're going up, just like the satin stitch, will be a different length. So I'm going to show you how this works for two different colors. So I'm first going to use this pink to create stitches of different lengths. So this is how we create our own gradients and the foundation for color blending. Remember, you don't have to be too precious about exactly where your stitches go and they end up. The beauty of it is that it is reversible, and it's really nice to just keep going and layering over the stitches. I think it's really important not to be hard on yourself about these being perfect. So here I have my first color of short and long stitches. I'm going to choose my second color, which is going to be along the same color family, but just a lighter version. So with your second color, you're just going to go along the same distance, meeting up with the stitches that you made before. It's totally okay that these aren't short and long, and there's really so much beauty in imperfection, and that's where you learn the most. So just keep going, filling it up. And it's also, if you feel like you need to compensate for areas that are missing, it doesn't have to be next to it. So I can see here, just over here, I'm missing, there is too much fabric sticking out. So I'm just going to go over, come out and pop into that. We're just going to keep layering until our area is full. And we're happy with how our fold looks. So the last stitch I'm going to show you is the French knot. French knots are really nice for creating texture. So you just need to thread your needle about the same length of 800 millimeters and knot the end. So you just come through like this. Then you want to wrap your thread around your needle 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And just put your needle through the fabric next to where your stitch came out. So here you can see there's the twist at the bottom of the needle just around the fabric. Then we're going to pull through, making sure that that twist is on the fabric, and if you need to, just open that loop up so that it's as close as possible and pull through. This is so satisfying when you get it right. So again, we're just going to wrap it around 1, 2, 3 times. Putting the needle in the fabric just next to where you came out and pulling through. Ooh, sometimes you need to just give it an extra wiggle. There we go. And super fast, looks like this. Cool, so that's your French knot, which is really nice for creating lots of textures like landscapes, the leaves on trees, the pollen in flowers, and any other kind of textural detail.